I'm Chris. I've been in Malaysia since about 2011, and I just basically fell in love with the place and have been there ever since. And in about 2016, 2017, I started working with Seacology and have tried to identify some projects around Borneo that have, this beautiful combination of some incredible wilderness as well as some communities that really want to protect it, but really want to kind of also develop different parts of their community and their communal economies. So Malaysia's a pretty incredible country. It's got an incredible history of kind of multicultural connections, different languages, different races, different food cultures, and really different approaches to development as well. You've got the incredible big cities like Kuala Lumpur, but also in Borneo, you have an incredible kind of cultural tradition as well as expanses of amazing rainforests, incredible river systems and reefs as well. Most of the time I'm working in Sabah and Sarawak, which has this other layer of incredible indigenous cultures where you've got 30 different indigenous languages in Sabah and over 15 in different indigenous languages in Sarawak. You've got some communities that live in individual houses, some communities that have these kind of horizontal apartment blocks called longhouses. Some communities you can only access by the river, some you can only access by walking there, some you can only access by really expensive four-wheel drive tires, and it's a really interesting mix of both the kind of very hyper-modern elements of life and a lot of the kind of more traditional elements that you might imagine. Borneo's, the third largest island in the world. Like most islands, its environment has developed and evolved kind of separate in many ways from any kind of other interactions. So a lot of the flora and fauna in Borneo is wildly unique. It's most well known for its orangutans. It's also known for its kind of Bornean elephants, some of the kind of rhinos as well, which have unfortunately kind of recently basically gone extinct, but also for some of the kind of the history of the tigers and some of the bigger animals. But it's also got an incredible range of mid-level animals like pangolins, for example, and hornbills, which are these amazing birds with like kind of a double beak, one that goes down and one that goes up. And it's then also got the most incredible range of insects you could possibly imagine, most incredible range of frogs and small birds as well. So it's still in many places the kind of wild Borneo that people might get excited or scared by because of the environment. But all in all, its rainforests have been identified as basically the oldest living rainforest system in the world. And as a result, you have, a range of plants and animals that have just kind of lived in these kind of incredibly dense rainforests for a long time. For the last 30 years, Malaysia's been undergoing a pretty incredible process of development that for many has been a real saddening process of transforming its natural capital into liquid capital, if you like. So in the 1980s and 90s, there was a street in Sandakan, which is a city in the northeast of Borneo. And in that street, it was at the time the highest percentage of millionaires of anywhere in the world because the incredible expansion of the logging industry led to a very small amount of people getting incredibly wealthy from this wonderful export of timber around the world that they had basically developed with very, very little regulations, very, very little checks and balances, and a very close relationship between government and business that had led to some of the fastest rates of deforestation of anywhere in the world. In the kind of 90s and early 2000s, when kind of they were looking for new models of development because there was a thought that the logging industry would need to slow down. Many people then looked for new innovations, and one came out of West Africa, which was what we now know as oil palm. And the oil palm industry has now become the biggest threat to environments in Malaysia, whether they are coastal, river or jungle environments. Oil palm now makes up 30% of the state of Sabah, the total landmass. You can drive across the state and drive through oil plantations on a highway for hours. It is probably making up that much of the state of Sarawak as well. If you ride on a boat down some of the major river systems in Sarawak, you can see these kind of floating gorges of timber that you'll pass for maybe 15-20 minutes, just kind of floating schools of fish almost lying on the surface, but they're all 30-meter long timber. And as you pass that, you will then see into the distance these kind of oil palm plantations that just go almost like spiders' webs as they trace around the kind of major mountains, but just kind of go into the distance as far as the horizon. The first project I worked on was in a village called Terian, and for about 3 years before the project, I had known one or two of the kind of younger people from Terian, just from kind of hanging out in the city and meeting them as they were passing through. And also at the time they were trying to mount a campaign to oppose a major dam being built in their village. And that is something that I took specific interest in, and had been kind of interested and involved in that campaign. So when we first started with Seacology, the first thing to do was to check on some of the older projects, and Terian happened to be one of the first Seacology projects, kind of the legacy projects. And unfortunately, it happened to have the microhydro project happened to have stopped working. So one of the first things we were able to do was to get that system back online. And in that kind of wonderful moment, not only were we able to kind of complete our first rejuvenated Seacology project, but we were also able to kind of get a lot more involved in that community that I'd known, I guess, peripherally for a while. So that was a really beautiful kind of coming together of a few friends and a kind of a really positive environmental outcome as well as social outcome for the village. One of my other favorite projects was a village in the northeast, which is a village called Dagat. And that was a really interesting project because it was the first time we have ever tried a bird's nest economic development type of model. Chinese medicine has a lot of interesting elements to it, a lot of interest in a lot of products that might not necessarily be so famous in the West. One of them is these kind of particular version of swiftlet bird's nest, where the birds kind of spit out this white nest for the chicks to hatch in. Once the chicks have hatched, they basically leave this kind of nest of spit, if you like, remaining. There has for hundreds of years been a trade with Chinese traders because they have always believed that these birds' nests were really valuable for health. They've now found that the antioxidant levels in these birds' nests are like kind of off the chain, and they've got levels of collagen that are also kind of not on par with anything else. So these birds' nests are now seen as white gold in China, and they happen to be from a particular species of birds that is just incredibly populated across river systems in Borneo. So a lot of the trade has always traditionally come from Borneo, usually from going into caves and trying to find these remote locations of birds' nests. But now what they do is they're able to set up a dark enclosure basically with a speaker system attracting the birds in. The birds fly in. If it's something that they like and they feel like they can be protected and hatch there, then they'll set up their little bird's nest. And then you kind of naturally are just left with these birds' nests left over. And for remote villages, it's one of the few products that they can really take advantage of. And then there's already kind of an industry in place without too many middlemen that kind of, undermine their value. So it is one of the few products that a remote community without a lot of engagement in, I guess, traditional capitalism can really take on, try out, utilizing basically resources that are around, and maybe make a nice little buck from that. And it's something that a lot of villages are interested in, but don't have the kind of liquid capital to invest in the physical infrastructure you need, or the kind of know-how, because there is a bit of technical know-how. So with that project, the Seacology grant was used for the physical infrastructure, as well as bringing in a consultant from another village who's set up a few bird's nest systems and kind of done a couple of weeks of training on how to set this up and get this little microeconomy going. The bird's nest was the kind of economic development model. The conservation element was, I think, 400 to 500 acres of community forest. And that forest is in one of the most ecologically significant parts of Malaysia. There was a really clear challenge to sell off and basically cut down this particular area of forest that a small group in the village, a small, powerful, very passionate group of largely young people were very, very kind of worried about this potential, village leader that might lead to kind of cutting it down. And what we were able to do is not necessarily kind of turn this community upside down, but just give that group of young people and their supporters another way of framing sustainability and another way of framing why that particular kind of expanse of forest might be valuable to protect in the future. And on top of that, give them a new kind of economic opportunity to sell to the village as well, which was in the form of this bird's nest development. Some of my favorite elements of being a field rep are being able to, in a way, reframe just the options that are available to these communities. It's incredible the amount of communal spirit and passion that these places have, but it's also disheartening a lot to just kind of hear what they think the options for themselves are. And a lot of communities feel like they're in a position where they either sell land and pay for their kids to, hopefully go to high school and university, or don't sell land and then their kids don't go to high school and university. A lot of the agricultural options that were a bedrock to their communities in the past, such as rubber and rice, aren't getting the kind of capital value that they would, 20 years ago. So a lot of communities believe that you can either sell your land, keep your land, or grow palm oil. With kind of the opportunities that Seacology can grant, it's really beautiful just to see what happens when you talk to people and you say, all right, but if they weren't the only options, what else would you like to kind of have as opportunities for development, or ways that you could balance the kind of elements of conservation or sustainability. And that's just, I think, like a really wonderful opportunity to see people open up and then get creative about, we could also do this, or we also always thought about doing this, or I've heard that this other village is doing something like that, and I never thought we could do that, but with the way that the Seacology model works, maybe that's possible.